everybody, my name is Tunde from Atelier Parva and welcome to a new sewing project vlog. It's finally springtime here and I felt the desire to make something airy and light, so I chose to make some sleepwear for the upcoming warmer days. I will show you today the whole process of making a nightgown with matching bloomers based on a vintage pattern. I'm gonna use this pink striped seersucker fabric with some cute cactus pattern. This lightweight cotton fabric is, I believe, a perfect match to the pattern I've chosen. And the pattern. I will follow a vintage Butterick sewing pattern for lingerie coordinates. I made the brunch coat, which is view B, already out of some cozy flannel, and I really love to wear it. I like to use patterns more than once to actually get the most out of them, so it was obvious that I'll make another version of this, which will be this time view D. Let's take a look at the pattern envelope. It has no exact date printed on it, but it's, I guess, from the 50s. View D is described as lace trimmed shorty nightgown with matching bloomers. I prepared all 7 pattern pieces, not all are actually required for this version. The nightgown is trimmed with lace as mentioned. I wanted to use something from my stash. 2 options came to my mind, this white lace and this picot elastic in matching color. It could be used for embellishing the yoke the same way as the lace, even though it's stretchy. I have plenty of both, so it could be a good way to clear out my stash actually. And I was quite undecided at this point which one to use. I laid out all the pattern pieces onto the fabric, which required some puzzling, I have to say. I had only 2 meters of the fabric, so I had to pin and repin the pattern pieces a couple of times to fit it all to the 2 meters of fabric. But I managed it at the end. There were no changes needed on the nightgown pieces of the pattern. I made it in another version as I mentioned last year, so I was sure that this will fit. However, the bloomers had to be changed a bit. I lengthened the legs and I omitted the darts and the pleats. I simply couldn't pull it over my hips with the darts in the back and the pleats in the front, so I had to remove that completely to add room around the hips and in the waist. And I figured for the pyjama set this will be absolutely fine. I also left out the waistband and plan to make casings for elastic on the waist, the same way as the pattern instructions suggest for the leg opening. So let's take a look at the instructions for the minute, just for fun. The nightgown can be made in 2 steps, they say. Of course, this consists much more than just 2 steps. The nightgown and the brunch coat are made in a similar way, and I was familiar with that already. As I removed the darts, the waistband and the closure from the bloomers, I hoped that they will come together easily and quite quickly. Now we move on to the actual exciting bits, to the construction. I followed the instructions step by step, started with stitching the center back and pressed it open, then the front and pressed it open. The long straight front, side and back seams I finished with French seams. This finishing technique requires to sew the pieces first with the wrong sides together, and I used a ½ centimeter of seam allowance here. Then I pressed the seam open. Then I matched the right sides together and stitched another line with 1 centimeter seam allowance through the whole front and back piece. This way the raw edge is completely closed. So that's what I'm doing here. And although I didn't film it all, the sides and all the seams were actually ironed before I moved on with the next stitching. I'm just working with one camera, so I was not filming at my ironing board. Once the center back and the front were finished, I moved on to stitch the underarm seams as well, the same way with French seams. Also, the upper edge was gaitered along the seam line between the markings. Then I pinned together the yoke back and front pieces and sewed them together. Both the yoke and the yoke facing was done like this. The latter will cover all the raw edges here, so no French seams needed this time. At the end I decided to use the elastic as decorative element instead of the white lace. It's a better match in color in my opinion, and the picots will peek out from the edge of the seams. I simply like this version better. So I sewed on the elastic at the neck and the lower edge. It was a slow and tedious process. I had to be very careful to sew on the trim at the seam line, so it took some time and some really focused stitching, but the result was good enough. It was time to go back to fix the armhole. It's finished with self-fabric bias facing according to the instructions, but as I had very little fabric left, I decided to plunder my stash and I used some store-bought bias binding. I roughly measured the length of the armhole and cut the purchase binding. I cut it longer as it actually needed because I knew it will be fiddly to attach the slippery satin binding. I've pinned the binding into place, stitched and pressed seam. You can also cut the curve at intervals so it sits flat. However, this cotton circa curve was rather forgiving in this manner, so it was not needed to cut into it. After I turned in the edges and ironed it over a tailor's ham, I secured the bias binding to the inner side of the fabric by hand. I always prefer this method for curves as it gives me much more control over the fabric. It's faster actually than removing machine stitches several times before I get it right. After the armholes were finished, upper edges of the front and back gaitered, I had to attach the yoke to finish the nightgown. First I stitched the two sections of the yoke together at neck edge, matched all the centers and markings while pinning. And this way the trimming was also hidden by the facing, leaving only the decorative picots visible. The next step is attaching the pressed yoke to the gown. The first outside section was pinned to the gown, again matching the dots and markings. I had to adjust here the gathers quite often to get those markings aligned. Stitching and ironing again, and now I had to turn the yoke facing inwards and sew it on by hand. Before moving on to the hand stitching, I finished the hem as I wanted to turn off the sewing machine for that day. So I pressed 3 centimeters of hem inwards with the help of this template. This is a simple cardboard where I marked several lines 1.5, 3 and 5 centimeters away from the edge. You can use whatever you need for a particular project. I align the edge of the fabric with the line on the cardboard, press it, and then I will end up at the end with an even hemline. When stitching down the hemline by machine, I simply fold from the already turned edge another 1 centimeter inwards. The raw edge will be turned inwards. I usually measure that just by eye, and I stitch the hem down. So this is what I'm doing here. And this is me securing the facing to the yoke by hand after I finished the lower edge and hemmed the whole gown by machine. For securing the facing and stitching it down, I use simple fell stitches. And after that, the gown was completed. So the next free day I used for finishing the bloomers. Honestly, I have very little footage of this process. I messed up assembling the leg seams. I had to redo it at least 3 times. My brain is just not getting this whole process, assembling the leg openings and the crotch and 4 two-dimensional fabric pieces together to this whole trouser thing. I'm not good at sewing pants. I simply have troubles to imagine it, how it should look like, and I believe I marked the notches incorrectly on the pattern pieces, and this caused me some serious headache. At the end, I ignored the instructions almost completely, and I tried to imagine how the bloomers should look like at the end. I stitched together the inside and then the outside leg seams, and then moved on to the center, back and front and stitched it in one go. Somehow it magically worked out for the 4th time. I omitted all the darts and pleats, used the elastic casing not only for the lower edge but also for the waist instead of waistband. I believe it will be more comfortable this way. And here are the finished pieces. I have to admit, the bloomers look very granny-like and they're really puffy, but that was exactly what I was looking for, so I don't mind it. Paired with the nightgown, I think it looks really cute. The pattern suggests lace not only for the yoke but also for embellishing the gown's lower edge and the leg opening, but I decided that that would be too much for me. I really love the vintage vibe of this and the pattern of the fabric. It's altogether a cute and playful ensemble, and I really enjoyed making it. If you enjoyed watching it and you'd like to see more of such videos, subscribe please and click the bell below to get notified. I upload every other Friday. Thank you for watching and see you soon. Bye.